Archbishop Ivan Jurkovic, thank you for welcoming us at your home here. You are the permanent observer of the Holy See to the UN. But let me ask you first, what is your personal background?
My personal background, if you consider me in the community of the Foreign Service of the Holy See, is very standard background. The community of diplomatic community, or diplomatic, so to say, people working in diplomacy of the Holy See is already very international. So I am not an exception of many other colleagues I have, but certainly I'm the only Nuncio coming from Slovenia for the time being in the service of the Holy See, and I've been abroad, away from my home already for 37 years.
But were you raised Catholic? I mean, when you were born, this is ex-Yugoslavia, we must say, it was under a communist regime. Were you raised Catholic, and how was it to live as a Catholic, possibly, under this regime?
My family was a very, very Catholic family for many reasons. Probably there was a tradition in the family, which was typical tradition of Slovenian, let's say, nation practically, And then we suffered. We were very anti-communist position of my grandfather and also of my parents, brought us in a very big sufferance after the war. So I lost my grandfather, was killed, my uncle was killed, in front of my family they suffered much. So we have also this attitude to elaborate, our Catholicism also in a way of perceiving social life and also political life from a different point of view.
But how was it to live as a Catholic under the communist regime? I mean, it was probably under Tito. Tito was not, belong to the Soviet Union, but still, it was probably not an easy time to confess one's own faith.
It was not as in terms that people were imagining for Eastern Europe. Yugoslavia was always a little bit atypical for Eastern Europe. So the worst thing I would say, and probably the thing that really hurt the church, was that the church was excluded for the social life. So it was, if not opposed, it was ignored, and being ignored is sometimes even more dramatic than being opposed.
So you live privately but not publicly?
Yes, it was generally social life. You can imagine that only the fact that Yugoslav citizens never needed a visa to travel the world, it means we were a completely different situation than the rest of the Eastern Europe. But again, in social life, we were certainly restrained to a very, very limited zone or a very limited field of strictly church-related activities.
So now you are here in Geneva. What is your impression of the work of the UN here in Geneva?
I've been around. My experience has been a little bit dominantly linked to Eastern Europe. What I can say, probably the Holy See have the access to Eastern Europe, especially to the Soviet Union, let's say, at the beginning, through its participation in international organizations, especially Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which opened the Holy See the possibilities to do something in favor of those who were not feeling, probably not having all the rights in Eastern Europe. So it means the Holy See always looked at the national organizations as an important aspect of diplomatic activity. Coming to Geneva, Geneva sounds very, very, how to say, it's a big name in diplomatic life, international life. The fact that Geneva is dealing mostly with the problems related to human rights and other activities of human activities that are related to the real, how to say, existence of well-being of human being, for me was a big motivation. So this offer, after so many years already in diplomatic service, to start again with the culture, this is exactly, you can imagine, this is a big word. I have probably 28 letters of recommendation or nomination to different directors general. So it means there's an enormous field of activity that is demanding also a new, how to say, enlargement of knowledges, probably capacity to communicate, and it happened in the time when the visibility of the Holy See is so big because of the present papacy. Present papacy is very much appreciated, very much visible inside of the international organizations.
Would you say that Geneva is in a way more important than the UN in New York because the human rights and the migration topics?
This is always somehow a homemade conversation that you can say who is more important. I would say international organizations, or life of international organizations is important as much as big players are serious, you know. Big players. Everybody must be serious, but big players must be really serious. You know, mankind is unfortunately or fortunately, or who knows why, run by big powers. And if we have ideas that are defended by big powers, we are in good shape. Holy See is coming as a different kind of player. It's not coming to impose or to, even from, let's say, Catholic Church has a specific view on many things related to the religious nature of the Catholic Church. We are not here changing things that we cannot change, you know. But I would say probably what we can do was appreciated, especially after Second World War, because of tragedy of atomic bomb and everything that happened. And all this tendency to have Holy See close, although there were also movements or who were opposed to our participation, was positive, was progressive and positive. Probably, thanks, I think the biggest merit for this goes to the popes, that we had enormously visible and impressive papacy in the last 50 years, let's say. And we have now, with we entered to this environment as important players.
What can the Catholic Church or the Holy See do what other nations cannot do, probably in this field, in the international community?
I think we have to do what the other nations don't do. Exactly. What can be? Let's say, generally speaking, it's difficult to answer, you know, it's a question that it's much bigger than the answer. I think a special fundamental approach of moderation, you know. We have, the world is becoming so easily radical. You have the ideas, all of a sudden becomes radical, and all of a sudden excludes many. I think a religious organization, a Catholic Church, must be moderate. And moderation comes out of the gospel, you know, it's not something invented. So we are taking care of human beings, especially those who are suffering, those who are not privileged. And means that requires moderation and somehow just distribution and everything that follows.
It's also moderation between litigating parties. I think Pope Francis, I mean the other popes also, everybody stresses the dialogue. You mentioned the great authorities that the popes had, the moral authorities. And is the Catholic Church, is the Holy See a forum where, on a neutral, let's say, in a neutral forum, parties that can litigate have a possibility to meet? Or could you mention any examples where this happens, possibly?
It is, you know, it is a delicate question, no? Because in generally speaking, it was traditionally position of the diplomacy of the Holy See, that the Holy See can enter as a player of, being element of bringing parties together only when two parties agreed upon that. We cannot be, an imposed player or somebody who only one part invites it. It doesn't work. This is technically speaking. But practically, many times I was saying, it's like in chemistry. My first education is in chemistry, you know. In chemistry, you have catalyzer, you know, element that is present. It doesn't change, but the reaction and everything that chemical reaction changes completely. It becomes much better. You have better burning, let's say, in the cars if you have a catalyzer. And I think we can do exactly, this is our definition. We are present. So often we do not enter into the merits, but development around, let's say, assistance of the papacy, basically, more than policy, the diplomacy, papacy, that means figure of the Pope, can be very, very beneficial.
So the relation between Cuba and the United States could be one example.
I would say, again, you have to take it as a soft definition, not as a strong. you know, there are also times are changing, and all of a sudden you see this potential of the Holy See, the Pope, I would say, basically, that brings, that makes things that could probably in the time disappear by themselves, but they disappear much more easily and more quickly. I think this element of catalyzing the processes which are on, it's quite substantial from the side of the Holy See.
Pope Francis has every once in a while mentioned or talked about the Third World War in pieces, so probably describing the dramatic situations in many parts of the world. What would you say after your experience of here in Geneva and your personal experience in your diplomacy? What are the most imminent
I would say,
questions?
I will tell you one thing. This is, I don't want to be the pessimist because there are so many people doing their best, and I think there are also good results when you're doing, so many people are making their effort to do better. We must believe the things are going, will be also better in the future. But I have to say that the list of the negative events is growing bigger, no? And that is a big concern. Especially, probably the biggest concern, absolutely the biggest concern is peace, you know. And the biggest concern is that we have undoubtedly the biggest amount of money spent for war, for armaments. So this is why Holy See would like to enter very strongly in the conversation and the discussion about disarmament, sometimes unconditional, which seems to be an illusion, no? But we have to believe, without peace we have nothing. All the achievements of mankind seems to be not sufficient to stop, how to say, unpredictable behavior of some important states or some certain prayers. So we have to be very attentive, and I think this is the major concern, the peace. We have a day of prayer for the peace every year. Our mission here has, how to say, National Day reception is around the day of the peace. So peace is still the biggest concern, I would say.
So we have the big challenge naturally of the situation in Syria and Iraq about the persecution of Christians. Is this is the world conscious, aware of it, enough aware of that situation, of the dramatic situation there, you think? Also the persecution of Christians, or let's say in a general way, religious persecution?
It is probably the people who are suffering, they see that we are not sufficiently aware. I many times said already in the conversation, we have 3 levels of knowledge, you know. First level is you read books or read statements, read statistics, and you are impressed and you are shocked. But you are much more shocked if you see pictures. But you are really shocked if you see the situation. I think we have to go to the situation and then judge, not judge just from the papers. Because otherwise, we can read in the morning and in the afternoon we forget. But once you see a picture, you don't forget it for one day. And when you see the situation, you don't forget it probably for one lifetime. So I think this is what also your service, bringing picture, how to say, bringing testimonies is so important. We have to bring more visibility to those who have no visibility. And this is also the ideal of the Pope.
What does the Church, or what can the Church do to help the Christians, maybe even to remain there, or to save them, to give them shelter and support and encouragement? Church
is part of the, participates on the world events. I think probably, but this is, I would say, probably a daring statement, we were not sufficiently aware of dramaticity of everything that happened, let's say, from the beginning of the second millennium. We were thinking it is kind of things that happens and disappears, but the fact is that anything that happened, let's say, since the tragic event in New York so many years ago, has been just progressing, bringing more sufferance and more injustice and changing the world substantially. Christian presence in the Middle East is one of the indicators. It's like an indicator, like lackmus, you see, and this shows that things are more dramatic that we will usually believe.
I heard that I think the Apostolic Nunciature in Damascus is the only one that's still open, the only representation of diplomatic representation that is accessible.
I cannot tell you that. I don't think it's that dramatic, but we were certainly, since the very beginning, I can tell you one very short episode. when the war in Iraq started. Nuncio was in Rome, and that was a time when there was still John Paul II, the Pope. And Nuncio wanted to inform the Pope, first, but the result was he should go back immediately. But there were no flights to Baghdad, so he had to travel from Jordania with the bus back to Baghdad. So it means we wanted to be in the place we wanted to be, and this is for us, a distinction. But I think many other diplomatic missions are also there in the place.
The Pope, the Vatican, if you want, has taken also a clear position in regard to the two-state solution and the acknowledgement of the Palestinian state. Is there anything? I mean, we know the Pope has, introduced the meeting between the Palestinian president and also the Israeli president at the time. What can the Church do more, to?
It is for us. It's the same thing. Like for us, Middle East is a place of our origin. Anything that touches Jerusalem and holy places is directly touching us. Solutions that we were always defending in the relations between Israel and Palestine was based on this conviction. Justice to the parts, taking seriously in consideration to the concerns of both parts, not only one, but trying to stay with a profile that is historical. It means Jerusalem is much more than a capital of a single country. Jerusalem is a holy place for many religions, must be open to everybody. But this seems to be, in the last period of time, seems to be once again put into the question, and which is certainly one of big concern also for the Holy See.
We see the Near East is coming close to Europe in a way. Let's talk about the question or the challenge of the migration, which is now in Europe very much discussed. Yeah. So there is naturally the need of welcoming people that are in need, giving them shelter. On the other hand, the discussion is, whether it goes beyond the limit of the capacities of the countries. What is your comment on that?
We have to probably, I would come back to something that once said Pope Benedict XVI. No? He said, it goes for human sufferance. Christian cannot be indifferent. We have to take consideration of human suffering. Migration is an enormous phenomenon that have always existed and will exist also in the future. Regulate migration is much better than leave it not regulated. Every country is invited to be generous, but every country has also its limits. So all these elements should be taken in consideration. But now, as the situation is, as we see Europe will need migration. We are in a demographic depression, which will not finish. So we will need the people. So we have to see what to do for these people. From the church side, I think we must be positive, much more positive. History will ask us questions in 50 years' time. Europe is already different and will be still different. It depends much from us how different it will be and what it can do. But we will have to answer one question. Were we, as a church, generous to the people who are coming and dying and coming? So we have to keep in consideration a serious event, a serious shock, but also being seriously generous.
I think probably an additional question or aspect of that in relation to former migrations is that the migration is also bringing in a different culture. So the fear that is there or present, at least some express it that way, of Islamization, etc. How can we, or what would be the answer to that? To that?
I think it is probably, now again we have to be attentive not to exaggerate. Sometimes the people are saying that many events are more touching the sensibility than the fact, that let's say that the percentage of refugees in Europe is much smaller than percentage of refugees in Turkey, for example. They have much more. And in some countries in the world is much more. What to do? I think we have to know, it would be nice to find our real European identity. We were looking for this identity since European project started, no? And we were not behaving in this regard very anonymously. No? We had, from one side, you have the attitude of being Christian past important element, or from the other side they said it's more labor. The problem is now that we have people coming with strong national identity and we have a very weak European identity, or not strong enough. So it will be a dialogue that will bring together parts, nothing will be as we think today. But I think reconsideration of our European identity will be needed.
Yeah. Would it mean a strengthening of the Christian identity? Because sometimes it's that the secularization, the tendency is that the more secular Europe will be, the more welcoming, the less problematic will be kind of a difference in the view or a difference in religion. But on the other hand, I think the respect maybe grow if the Christian identity would grow. So also as a basis for a reasonable dialogue between Islam and Christianity.
I would answer so briefly. It would be Christian value-based attitude, if not Christianity, but Christian values-based identity. So it means certainly specificity of Europe was forgotten probably in the last years, but it's strong exactly because it brought some freedom, some elements that gave human beings possibility to develop, and in many aspects of Western culture is linked exactly to this condition that were created in Christian world. No?
Yeah. Another delicate topic is probably the topic of the family. That's all the gender. So we know very often Pope Francis is talking about the gender agenda. Yeah. How much do you feel or do you experience the gender agenda here at the UN and the United Nations, and what does the Catholic Church, probably with other partners together, do regarding that?
Gender agenda was of certain, I don't know whether concern or certainly a surprise, because it developed, let's say, if we consider that people who would be personally involved in the question related to gender agenda are, let's say, 10%. So we have 90% of other people who would not have exactly this priority for many reasons. So I think this disproportion is certainly visible. So we have much more, let's say, attention to many aspects of gender agenda than to promotion of family, than to having how to raise family, how to let's say develop a city that will be more family friendly. Apartments that would be more family friendly would have more in view not the well-being of parents but also the children. So we are certainly challenged by this new ideology or I think from the point of view of if you speak with the ambassadors, it's much more a culturally imposed agenda. For many countries, this agenda is not by itself for the big priority, but culturally imposed. It is big players, big countries that have means, they impose this agenda.
Pope Francis even speaks about colonialization in a way.
I think it is a very good expression, because it means all of a sudden we have to adopt a list of cultural priorities that are not really part of our societies.
Coming back to your background, that you were the Apostolic Nuncio, you were in Moscow, you went to Ukraine, in Russia. Yeah. Maybe a brief question about the situation, Ukraine, Russia. There are a lot of tensions. Mm-hmm. How do you see the situation? Do you see a possibility of solution? What is your take on that?
Every situation in the world has a solution. We have to believe that. And I think also this has a solution. The problem is that the basic point of views are still divided, very strongly divided and polarized. Probably also religious organizations, through promoting a more moderate approach, we could bring probably both parties to a more pragmatic approach, to sort out these enormous problems and to find out solutions that would take into consideration the concerns, legitimate concerns of all involved. For those people who are suffering, this is absolutely terrible, and people suffering in the place are suffering really incredibly, and you see the testimonies coming out of these situations. But probably it would be necessary that together all the forces of the society will bring together the parties in order to find a possible, feasible, stable and pragmatic solution.
The historic meeting of Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill last year on Cuba. Were you involved in this somehow because of your background?
Yeah, I was Nuncio in Moscow for 5 years, but I was also 4 years in Moscow from 92 to 96 as a deputy mission, head of mission. So I think I knew all the, attempts to bring Pope and Patriarch together for a historic meeting. We had it, and thanks God that we had it, and that we have a new icon, I call it icon, for the mankind. We can put it on the wall, we can see Catholic Church and Orthodox Church have different relations now than used to have it in the past.
What will this bring about for the future? What hopes, what is your hope?
I will tell you one thing, look at this. It is again referring to the expression and the statement made by the Pope Benedict XVI. If you consider importance of the relation between the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church for Africa, what is the importance? Probably not a very big one, no? What about Americas? What is the importance of the relation between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church for the Americas? Probably not very big ones. For Asia, the same. What about Europe? He said, there is not a correct vision of Europe with correct relations between the Catholicism and the Orthodoxy. It's essential for us, not only for Europeans or for countries, but also for European project, the European Union. So we have to, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church are bringing essential element for the new understanding and better understanding. This is why it's really dramatically important and critically important for all of us.
Your last question, you talked about the increasing difficulties or challenges in the world over the last decades, let's say, in the 21st century. Where is your hope based on? I mean, you're working on that, the church is working on that. What is your hope based on that to improve the world for a better time?
I think as a bishop and nuncio, I should give a spiritual answer to this. I think the church, the religion probably, if you're speaking more generally, our action as Christians, because many people are goodwill, this is good, the gospel speak about the people goodwill. I think in the international organizations you find millions of people, thousands of people, goodwill, real goodwill, I think we, let's say, gospel, Christ, let's say, Catholic Church, Christianity, all religions, we are on the side of the good news. No? We should do everything we can. We are capable. We must believe that we are capable to avoid bigger problems, or at least diminish the sufferings and the problems that are existing now.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency,
for
this interview.